What's up, everybody? It is Dr. Greg Jones here again, and I finally have a name for this podcast. I've decided to name it the Optimization Academy. I know that's crazy, but I feel like there's education, there's a series, there's an academy. There may be exams at the end. I can't promise you that, but I finally picked a name. So, I feel free to criticize me at your free will. I am very honored today to have Dr. Paul Anderson on the show. So Dr. Paul is a naturopathic physician, an ND like myself. He is the founder and medical director of Anderson Medical Specialty Associates, AMSA. He is a recognized authority in the field of integrative cancer research and the treatment of chronic diseases, genomic conditions, and autoimmune and infectious disorders, right? Important for the environment we're in right now, especially. Dr. Anderson founded Advanced Medical Therapies in Seattle, Washington. This clinic is focused on the care of patients with cancer and chronic diseases, and he is the co-author of Outside the Box Cancer Therapies with Dr. Mark Stengler, as well as a co-author with Jack Canfield in the anthology Success Breakthroughs, and has an upcoming book, Cancer, the Journey from Diagnosis to Empowerment. This is great, but as a naturopathic doc who's graduated in the last 20 years, let me tell you the real deal. If there is a doc out there that says, I didn't use Dr. A's study materials to get ready for boards, step 1 or step 2, or get CEs, they are full of shit, and you can tell them I said it, and come find me. That's what I'm going to say, because and I'm going to say thank you for every naturopathic doctor out there that hasn't said it to you. Thank you for the things you've done to help us get through boards and the study materials. And this is like, when it comes to living naturopaths, like a Mount Rushmore, you're on it, man. I'm just telling you, so this is an honor for us. So here today. So
well, thank you.
Real quick, those books, can they find those on Amazon or your website?
Yeah, so all of them, but the two that are currently out, any online outlet,
Okay.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Powell's Books Online, they all have it. Okay. So that's the easiest way. On Outside the Box Cancer Therapies, there's a bunch of books called Outside the Box, but not cancer therapies. So just keep going and you'll find our book.
Okay, got it. I appreciate that. So today we're going to be talking about COVID, and I know, I get it. You're tired of talking about it. That's the people listening. Not exactly Dr. Anderson, because we're still in this, right? So, but I really wanted to have this conversation because this is an optimization series or academy, and it's really about what can we do, the people at home do to protect themselves, to fight, to recover. So I wanted to have this conversation and talk about, we were kind of discussing this, like our areas, right? So one is you're walking around day to day, what can we do for ourselves? And we're going to talk about, if you have COVID rather, and you're asymptomatic versus symptomatic, then we're going to talk about recovery and then testing. And then hopefully we'll walk out of this being a little bit smarter. So let's start with, the person walking around, they've never had the virus. They want to stay healthy. They want to be in the best position to, again, there's no prevention when it comes to that, but, they want to be in the best position health-wise to recover if they do contract COVID.
Yeah. So I think it's a perfect place to start. And yeah, I think something that needs to be said is, you can always do everything just right and still get sick with something. That's just the human condition. But the other side of that coin is you don't have to try and not do things right and then have it be worse. So you always want to think about what are the best procedures, processes I can do to either make myself a poor target, or if I do get and develop an infection, to be as healthy going in as possible. Because, as we'll talk about later, like the people where it doesn't go so well, there are surprise things, that might be genomic and stuff like that. But if you start out sick and you get a, SARS-1 or COVID, you're in big trouble. So the first thing is being as healthy as you can with the body you have at this moment. So if you have health challenges, maximizing your management of them. So for example, because it comes up, with everything you read about COVID, either a little or a lot overweight and or blood sugar problems. Those are always in the top, comorbid problems. So I've had people say, well, I'm not going to lose 40 pounds in the next week. That's not realistic. And I got this blood sugar problem. Here's the bottom line. You got to start with where you're at. And you can, of course, always improve. We all can. But the better you are controlling your blood sugar, especially with your diet, in your dietary intervention with your diabetes, and the less you're relying on the meds to control your blood sugar. Certainly if you need the meds, you need the meds. But the more that your diet and your movement and exercise and stuff are helping you with your blood sugar, even if you do develop COVID, you're going to be a better target as far as your health and your survival. If you're uncontrolled, your diet is not helping you at all, and you're very sedentary, that is a person where it's like a dry forest. It's ready to touch off with a match and be a forest fire. In the case of somebody, say, who's a bit or a lot overweight and they have poor blood sugar control, if those are not being dealt with at all, the COVID literally goes into a setting where you're pro-inflammatory, and you get those problems like the cytokine release, syndrome, cytokine storms, and all those bad things. So you can go and you can be the same person and either do the best you can to control stuff or not do anything. The best you can is still better than not worrying about it or not doing anything. So let's say that's not a problem. You don't have blood sugar problems or whatever. There's a lot of real basic things that go back to determinants of our own health. And they're things like your grandma would tell you. Sleep. Sleep is huge for immunity, and people are under stress. I know, a lot of people either lost jobs or they're working from home, and that's weird and different and it's stressful, and or any number of things, or they got family who are sick. Stress makes you not sleep the best. It's not really the greatest thing for you. So you have to deal with your sleep and your stress, knowing that this is the world we live in for the moment. So whatever you do to deal with those things, and if you're not used to it, either developing or looking into like mindfulness practices or meditation or grounding or anything you can do to get yourself calm enough so you sleep, huge. Um, the other kind of grandma advice I always think of is hydration. And, everyone talks about drink enough water, drink enough water. In the case of a respiratory virus, where it comes in through your respiratory system, the mucous membranes that line your respiratory system have a defensive mucus. And hydration is key to the defensive mucus being produced appropriately. And so, most people, I guess, understand this analogy, so I'll still say it. I'm not too old. It's like fly paper, okay? You see those strips of fly paper and the flies are stuck to it.
Mm-hmm.
The mucus that you make in your mucous membranes is not just, snot or something like that. It actually has immune proteins in it. And they literally will trap viruses and bacteria and other stuff that you breathe in or get in your eyes. If you're real dehydrated chronically, you can't make enough of the mucus, and it's like it's got holes in it. So again, just to be a good barrier, hydration is super, super important. Now, if you actually get sick, there's another side to that we talk about a little bit later. So basic stuff, all of that. The other thing, even if you don't have blood sugar problems, is the way that you eat and move, okay? Eating, you want to do things that are supportive to a lot of dense nutrition and not a lot of insulin signaling. So that means like a lot of plant material with a lot of color, not a lot of sugar, not a lot of simple carbs, decent amount of proteins and fats. That will keep your blood sugar level. And the thing about blood sugar is it's really an indicator of what your insulin is doing in the background. And you keep coming back to insulin. You say, well, why do diabetics have so much more trouble with COVID? Insulin irregularities are pro-inflammatory. And if you, like a lot of, say, type 2 diabetics, they release too much insulin, and especially if their diet's not really well controlled, well, you can be not a type 2 diabetic and still release too much insulin if you eat a lot of carbs and sugar and stuff. Insulin surges, and it's too much for the sugar, so it goes around, it turns on inflammatory triggers. And so if you get COVID, the last thing you need from anywhere is inflammatory triggers. So eating sensibly, just, like a lot of color, a lot of dense nutrient, vegetables, clean proteins and fats, and not a bunch of junk and processed stuff and sugar and, all that business. That alone will decrease all of this insulin, bouncing around and creating inflammation. So again, you got real basic things: sleep, hydration, how we're eating. Paired with how you eat is moving your body. So the skeletal muscle in our bodies that moves us around, if it's active, even if you're, again, a lot of people say, well, geez, I'm way out of shape, I can't do this, or I just got done having surgery and I'm not feeling well, or whatever. Even if you have a limitation, let's say you can't walk, but you can move your arm muscles and work them from a chair, that, believe it or not, is enough signaling to, it triggers your metabolism away from insulin excess. And so if you are mobile, and let's say you're not you're not used to doing a lot of exercise, I just tell people to add one thing every week. So like another lap around the house or around the block or something, or another few times up and down your stairs, or whatever. Just something to get your core muscles working. It actually makes a huge difference. And this is something that we've seen in cancer survival for the same reason: is the more the muscles work, the longer you live. Well, the more the muscles work and the less junk you eat, the better your insulin handling and the lower that inflammation is. So, I mean, those are all just super basic things, that go
Right.
along with decent health. And then you can add, supplementing and other cool things on top of it, but you want to do the core first.
Okay. Yeah, and that's so, so basic, right? The things that, especially as naturopaths, we talk all day.
Right.
It's kind of foundations of health. It's like sleep, water, and I always joke about the endless health memes on Instagram. Drink more water, and it's like, gee, thanks, but it's important, and people think they
It's,
drink
yeah,
enough and they don't,
yeah.
Then movement, just any type of general movement, and then you touched on it briefly and how important managing your stress is, because the more stress, the more cortisol release, and eventually you get in a situation where elevation of cortisol can weaken the immune system, and now you're just a prime target, if you will. You're just walking around with a target, bullseye on your back for not just COVID but any other type of infectious process. So you have that now. Something to kind of touch on here, and I guess we started to go down this path, and I think this will lead us into the next section here, is you mentioned about, hey, there's some supplemental things you can do, and again, I want to point out that anything that we're saying here is not medical advice. We are doctors, not your doctors. So anything we say here, don't go running off like Dr. A and Dr. Jones said, take 25,000 IUs of vitamin A, and here I am, presenting to your nearest gastroenterologist. So if you want to kind of take us through some of the basics, general supplements that are great for keeping the immune system humming along. And I also want to make a distinction here is, and this is something, if you agree or disagree, I appreciate either, is that I never like using the term, here are some supplements to boost your immune system, because I think that's kind of, there's a such thing as a too much of a boost, so I don't want to, even get people thinking that path. So
it's, the idea of, or the phrase like boost your immunity plays really good in memes and on social media.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah.
as a concept, it's sort of like we're talking about, like you want enough insulin, not too much. You want enough immunity. You don't want too much or too little. So what we're really talking about is more optimizing, like your show. It's, we occasionally you do, kind of kick the immune system in the pants if you're really sick and you want to kind of get over something. But mostly what you want to do is support what your body uses up so quickly when you get sick. And so you're not really boosting, you're replacing and optimizing. And that's super important. So the way I usually talk about this, because it's, it's not medical advice, and you should work with a naturopathic doctor, somebody trained with nutritional medicine. Because if you go to a lot of doctors and they don't have that training, they'll say, well, I don't know. I don't know if those vitamins are good for you or not. So go to somebody who knows, like you, who are trained. But if you think about it, and it's always, people tie into, because I've been talking to patients for a long, long time, and I find that the more that they understand, like, why would this be important? It seems weird to some people. If I'm eating food, why would I need to take a pill with some vitamins in it, right? And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. But if you're trying to like prevent or work on an early viral illness, you're in a deficit, so you need to. But if you understand why that's going on, I think it makes more sense as to why you should look into these things. The first thing is there's a lot of nutrients in humans that are great until you get sick, and this is the thing with like asymptomatic people or whatever, that they don't realize. You may not be sick yet, but if you think about cold and flu season, you're actually fighting all this junk in the air all day long, right? Now we have a pandemic level virus, so that's around, plus colds are around and whatever else is around. And the important thing to remember is when you're fighting and you don't feel sick, you're actually, the reason you don't feel sick is because you're fighting stuff off. That requires more resources that you don't see going out. If you're real sick, you kind of know, well, geez, I'm sick, so I must be using up a lot of stuff. So during like the cold season, cold and flu season, people don't realize how much, zinc and vitamin C and glutathione, all these good things they burn up every day, especially the water soluble ones like that. So the stuff I'm about to summarize in the shortest version I can are the things that kind of are the middle of the road to put on top of your diet and your lifestyle stuff and all that, that I personally use with my family and myself. I'll just use myself as an example. Again, don't you do what I do, just this is an example. But during times of either like what we're dealing with right now and or cold and flu season, there's a couple fat soluble vitamins, which means that they do build up in your system, and so you want to monitor that with somebody that knows how to dose them. But vitamin A and then the vitamin D and K are kind of a pair. They work together. They're fat soluble. So vitamin A has a couple really big things that it does. One is it's used in viral immune response. But the other thing that's super important is it's used in the immune maintenance in the lungs, in the respiratory system. It's huge affinity to the respiratory epithelium. And so vitamin A becomes one of those things that you don't need a lot, like if you're super healthy, but if you're fighting off all this respiratory stuff, or if you get an infection like COVID and you're wanting to weather it, the vitamin A becomes really important. And so for maintenance for myself, I take of the fat soluble vitamin A, I'll take 10 to 25,000 IUs a day. Now that's something that if you do that long term, you want to have someone monitoring you. Short term, maybe not such a big deal. Vitamin D, almost everyone's heard of. It like does everything. It's good for everything, and so it's almost like water. It's like, oh yeah, more vitamin D talk. Let's not talk about that. But vitamin D and if you can, vitamin D and K often come together now. They help each other. Again, keeping your levels, like in the above 50% of normal. So for people who are tracking their levels and they're already on a regular dose of vitamin D to keep you there, that might be plenty, might be all you ever need. A lot of people have never had their vitamin D checked, don't think about it. Vitamin D is really critical to immunity, just like vitamin A is. So if you don't know your levels, maybe get them checked, see what you need to do to get there. For example, if you're really low, you might need a big 50,000 units a day or something. If you're almost there, you might need 5,000 units a day. It's really very individual. But because vitamin D and A and K build up, you want to kind of have a plan for using them with your naturopath or somebody educated that way. The water soluble nutrients have a lot more safety. So like the B vitamins and vitamin C and minerals we'll talk about and stuff, because whatever you take in that you don't need, you're going to eliminate one way or the other. Mm-hmm. Vitamin C have been talked about a lot, and this is something that I've published on around COVID and around other stuff. But the thing with viruses and vitamin C is humans don't make their own vitamin C. Somewhere along the line, we lost the enzyme to do that. Most other animals do. We don't. So if another animal that makes vitamin C gets a virus, they make more. Humans, we can't do that. So we're relying on our diet and then supplements. So definitely look up high vitamin C foods, make sure they're part of your nutrient dense diet. But vitamin C being water soluble and being used and gone in a day, you can take more if you're getting ill and you'll absorb more. The way that people know is literally bowel tolerance. So you take too much vitamin C, you get loose bowels. You don't want that. So if you divide, I just tell people, because it's easier to remember, take some with each meal. So say 500 or 1,000 milligrams each meal. If you don't get loose bowels, take a little bit more the next day. You'll find a place, you level out. And what I always warn people is if they do get sick, so they start to get fever or any other signs of the illness, you want to start to take more, because as your immune signaling goes up, your vitamin C absorption will improve and increase. So vitamin C is kind of a personal, individualized dose, but I always tell people it's the cheapest thing. And if you only have funds for one supplement and everything else you're going to do by diet, get vitamin C, because that's the one thing you can't make on your own, you know.
Right.
Others, I'll do just in a quick group here, and really for practicality, I do them in a group too. We hear a lot in the news and like on these reports about zinc, and it's true. You know, zinc is big for white blood cell function, and it's big for antiviral activities. And I mean, the CDC even has some real cool videos on how zinc might block COVID from replicating and stuff. It's you know, so it's a very well-known thing. The thing with zinc is it's a trace mineral. It's in a lot of foods, so you look that up. But zinc goes with other trace minerals and is really better as a group rather than just take a ton of zinc and nothing else. So I always tell people to start with a multi-trace mineral that's got selenium and zinc and chromium, a little bit of copper and other stuff, because you need selenium for immune processes, you need chromium. It's all important. And then if you really need extra zinc, you can take more. The one caveat with zinc is if you take it on an empty stomach, you can sometimes get really nauseated or throw up. So don't do that. Minerals best with while you're eating. Take them. Take all this stuff while you eat anyway.
Yeah.
And the other one that I think, I mean, there's a million herbs and supplements and other stuff, but the other one that really needs to stay in the limelight is an amino acid called cysteine. And supplements are generally called N-acetylcysteine because that absorbs better by mouth. Cysteine, even go pre-COVID, if you're in the hospital and you're on a ventilator and it's plugging up with your mucus, they will use N-acetylcysteine to help thin out your mucus. Cysteine is involved in a ton of things in your body, but one thing is that mucous membrane protection thing. So hydration and then cysteine. And when you're getting sick and you get inflamed, you overdo the flypaper effect, so it gets too sticky. That's when you don't breathe so well. So cysteine helps with that part. But the other thing cysteine does, which helps with like the nastier side effects of COVID and some of the late symptoms that go on, is cysteine helps your body make glutathione. And glutathione is a big antioxidant like vitamin C. They work together. And that goes down when you get sick as well. So less antioxidant means very poor inflammatory balance, more lung inflammation, more clotting, all stuff you don't want. So N-acetylcysteine is way cheaper to take in than say glutathione, and which can be expensive. There's nothing wrong with taking glutathione, but because N-acetylcysteine has this effect on your lung mucosa and mucous membranes production, and it also helps with glutathione. It's sort of 2 for 1. And so I always tell people, if beyond vitamin C they can get one other thing, N-acetylcysteine is probably big player, because it's also water soluble. And then there's a ton of if you work with a naturopathic doctor or somebody trained to do this sort of thing, there's a lot of specific herbal medicines and other things based on your case and kind of your presentation. But those nutrients, I mean, since COVID started and, since like I'm in Seattle and we were where the first known case in the US was.
Mhm.
My whole family's just been doing that group of things on a preventive basis the whole time. And so, yeah, you can get creative from there, but that's where you want to start, I think.
Okay. Well, definitely appreciate that. And it's a good start, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, hey, it goes back to the original foundation thing. Like, hey, you know what? You want your basic lifestyle things. Now here are some supplements that kind of help your immune system be nice and balanced, because again, it's not a preventative thing, of course, but it's more
Right.
of like, okay, this is how we prepare, and,
Yeah.
and be in the strongest position possible. Now, again, let's just say you're doing all these things here, you're dodging like the matrix, and hey, I've done all these things, and like, your coworker is positive and you go get a test, or you just decide, hey, I want to test, and boom, your PCR is positive. But in this scenario, first scenario, you're asymptomatic. You're positive. Hey, there it is. I don't have a symptom in the world. Do any of those strategies change in the asymptomatic positive population?
Yeah, I think everything we've said up to this point still applies.
Mm-hmm.
When you are asymptomatic positive, and it would be a situation like that where you're near someone, but you don't feel bad, but you have a reason to get tested usually, and it turns up positive. What my normal advice to people in that situation is, maybe you'll stay asymptomatic, but you have no idea. Okay. And let's say, for the sake of argument, the test is correct and you do have it. Um, if that's the case, I usually tell people, because we don't know if you're going to stay asymptomatic or not, now's the time to be extra preventive. So,
Right.
like augment and optimize your system at a higher level. And so I would usually have them, again, vitamin C is easy because it's bowel tolerance. The other stuff, I would usually like double or triple the doses for a 4 week period. Um, because in that period, let's say you're in a window, let's say it's classic infection, you're in a window of 1 to 2 weeks where you don't have symptoms, then you develop the illness. In this illness case, that's the time you want to fill the tank really good, because you're still feeling good, you're still eating, you're doing all that stuff. Um, if you and I've had people where they did that. I'm helping a lot of people who are currently symptomatic testing positive, and family members of theirs who aren't symptomatic. I've had people where they did that and then they kind of had a moderate cold like illness and then kind of got over it and weathered it pretty well. Or I've had them catch it a little later, don't do anything preventive, and they get a pretty nasty flu like illness, a little more aggressive, but then they get on everything and it kind of truncates down, and they may have a little bit more tail end stuff to deal with. But for me, if it was me, and so far every time I've tested, I've been negative, so great. But I'm doing all my preventive stuff. But if I tested positive but was asymptomatic, I would become super, on all of that, and I'd be doing higher doses for like a 4 or 5 week period, and then kind of treat what you see when you develop, if you develop symptoms or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you, and this will kind of transition us into the symptomatic positive. Is that what are your thoughts on increasing alkalinity, whether that be eating more alkaline-based foods or doing like an Alka-Seltzer Gold or a good alkaline water? Because I think half the stuff in the stores isn't really,
Yeah.
that's just water. It's,
Yeah.
but it really
Yeah.
is. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
I think on the order of yeah, I think on the order of pH is super complex in the
Hmm.
human, and there was um, there was a long time where we kind of thought, well, your body balances pH so tightly, it's not going to shift a whole lot if you say take in something or whatever. But what we've seen with a lot of research, especially around cancer patients, where I come back to cancer partly because that's part of what I do, but also
Right.
the the tumor biology and the viral infection biology have a lot of crossover in the way that they work. And what we've seen with cancer is people can actually shift the pH, and it's not like you shift pH too much and you're dead, right? So it's
Right.
not that, but it's shifting pH to a particular end of the spectrum. You can actually do that with external things, whether it's through diet or supplementing things, et cetera. so that your body stays a little more immune positive for you and negative for virus, tumor, etc. And so, and what's interesting also is if you look at, like we talked about N-acetylcysteine, another thing it does really well is it helps to keep toxic junk you've mobilized in your plasma. We do that every day because we live in a toxic world. It helps to move it out through your urine or your bowels. Well, pH shifting a little bit actually supports that. It helps that your cells detox, etc. So most of what I have seen, clinically speaking, and just from a lifestyle point of view, if you're eating, the core of your diet are these real colorful, high density vegetables that have a lot of flavonoids and other stuff, that naturally kind of shifts you in that direction anyway. So that's a bigger driver than anything you could ever take, in. So
Right.
your diet, great. And when I said, clean protein and fats, not processed, not, all the modern ways to, grow those things. So, basic stuff that's not processed, full of junk, all of that also, supportive there. In allergic patients, you mentioned like Alka-Seltzer Gold, which is a sodium and potassium, alkaline mixture. Everyone knows what Alka-Seltzer is, but it's the
Right.
one without aspirin.
Right.
And we use that a lot with people with allergic inflammatory stuff. It actually works pretty quick. They also make a a vitamin C powder that has those same alkaline minerals in it. There's a lot of, not a lot, there's a few alkaline mineral things you can add in. So that
Okay.
is a way, on top of your diet to maybe help out. But your pH, you're not talking about big shifts that lead to death. You're
Right.
talking about pushing to the more or less healthy side of the pH balance. Yeah.
Okay.
Your diet does most of that. And
Right.
so that's why we start there.
Okay. Now, shifting to that, and this, not to rehash it, but, because again, a lot of the things that we've been discussing are the same things you're going to do if you're symptomatic positive. So, on top of that, are there a certain, number of these supplements that you would want to increase or add on if you find yourself in that position?
Yeah. So let's say, I found out I was exposed, I test positive, and tomorrow I develop a fever or aches or, any of the common symptoms. What I would do is I would, again, for probably a 4 or 5 week time period, the fat solubles, I wouldn't worry about short term, long term. Yes, you need to worry more about them, but I would kick the vitamin A way up, like to 50 or more thousand IUs. I'd probably kick the vitamin D up to 50 plus thousand IUs. I would definitely take the vitamin C to my bowel tolerance, so I'd spread it out through my meals. N-acetylcysteine, I'd probably go from 1,000 milligrams a day to 3 or 4,000 milligrams a day. And the one thing, if I became symptomatic, I would probably put in for sure, and there's a couple reasons for it, but it's a bioflavonoid called quercetin. Quercetin is in the family of polyphenols and subfamily flavonoids. Flavonoids are in nature. A lot of times, best example is you peel a citrus fruit and there's that white fluffy stuff inside. Flavonoids are made by nature to be in there to keep the fruit from oxidizing. So they stabilize the fruit. Well, if we take them, they have that effect. They kind of level out our oxidation patterns, which is great. That's a really good thing. But the other thing that they've researched with quercetin is it actually increases zinc uptake into your cells, which when you have a virus will block viral replication. And so we hear a lot on the news and stuff about zinc ionophore drugs. They don't usually call it that, but like hydroxychloroquine and some of the other unique drugs that, one of their mechanisms is to put zinc in your cells. Well, quercetin is a way to do that with no cardiac effects potentially, and a lot of other positives that come from it. So in the case of my friends who have turned up positive, and they either were on the front end becoming symptomatic or way symptomatic, definitely to all the stuff we talked about earlier, we added quercetin in, at least 2,000 milligrams a day. And that really does help the zinc get into the cells, but it also helps with that inflammatory response. If you think about like the real bad effects with COVID, uh, a lot of them are pro-inflammatory, whether it's the clotting or the respiratory distress. All the big bad ones are inflammatory in some way or the other.
Got it, got it. So appreciate that. So now we're going to shift gears into, now and I guess it's interesting because we've gone through this, but we haven't even talked about IV vitamin C yet. So I know that's a whole other category as well,
It's a
but
whole other thing. Yeah.
oh my gosh, yes it is, yes it is. So let's just say now we're in the scenario where, okay, you're, whether it's symptomatic or asymptomatic, and now you've done your 14 days or, however long it is, you're quarantined, and now you're ready to get back in the world, but now you're kind of got some lingering things going on. So we're talking about the big four, and we're going to talk about fatigue, digestive issues, neurological symptoms, and respiratory symptoms, and kind of, I know that's a lot, but at the same time, I guess we can kind of do a quick drive by on those and just talk about some of the things that could be considered if you're, dealing with
Yeah.
lingering symptoms. So.
Yeah. And to make it as straightforward as possible, because you could spend forever discussing the biology of these things, but just to boil it down, when you get to post-viral syndromes, and post-COVID is a really aggressive post-viral syndrome, depending on what you had wrong.
Right.
But I've talked to people like who, I have some doctor friends that like were eating super clean and on all the right supplements and everything, and they got exposed, and they're the only one in their family. No one else got it. They got bad, wound up on oxygen. They get to the other side. Now they're fatigued, and they've got, still some breathing problems and all this stuff going on. In post-viral illness, and with COVID being a real trigger for a lot of the inflammatory chemicals that create these bad things, clotting and all that bad stuff, there's two targets really. One target that we haven't talked about yet, which becomes super important, is during an illness, especially viral illness or any protracted illness like pneumonia or something, your mitochondria that develop all the energy in your body get a beat down. They just take a hit. And a lot of the post-viral fatigue is the fact that your mitochondria have been the life sucked out of them nutritionally, and they're set to to be on slow speed. Part of that is your body's fighting so hard initially, it's like overdrawing your bank account. It uses too much. The other part, though, is that there's signaling that goes back to your mitochondria when you're sick to slow you down, because you're sick and you're not going to need a ton of energy. Problem is, you come out the other side and it's like you're stuck in first gear. So addressing the mitochondria as soon as we know you're going to breathe and not clot and all that business, and you're on the healing end, but you feel horrible. Addressing the mitochondrial defects or deficits are super important. That's a time where obviously the things people think about often, which are true, the B complex is super important there. There are some herbs that are real important. One of the things, though, that we have available now that we didn't used to are oral things that increase the NAD, which is related to vitamin B3, and it's what primes your mitochondria. So, for instance, when I have people in that situation, I'll use oral nicotinamide riboside, NR. It's available. It's got a lot of research about raising your NAD levels, and it's very effective in pulling you out of the hole. So mitochondrial resuscitation and rebuilding is something that people often forget in the post-viral phase, and it's really the number one important thing once you roll out the deadly stuff. So that's a big one. And then the other things, like still having trouble breathing or still having extra thick blood that might clot, or things beyond the profound fatigue that hangs on, those revolve around refilling your antioxidant reserves. So the glutathione, vitamin C, vitamin E a little bit, and then all the things that help that, like omega-3 oils and all of those. So your targets really are around your oxidation reduction apparatus, which are your antioxidants and good fats, and then the mitochondrial repair, because they've been just beat up for the illness. And those have to be the main, supports. Now, if you have somebody who has lingering clotting issues, there's still potentially throwing clots or something. Mostly the medical system will have them on something for that till they're out of the woods. But if, let's say, you weathered it at home, you didn't get a lot or any outside medical care, with COVID, you want to remember that the clotting issues can be a big deal underneath the surface. And so that's something, again, you'd want to work with a doctor on to make sure that you had something to cover, the excess clotting. Well, it's interesting, just timing wise, I did a podcast an hour ago talking about the genomic stuff that's coming out about different groups of people and why they get symptoms and others don't and stuff. And there's a lot of variability in the genes that we carry that are silent that then code for inappropriate clotting. They will become very non-silent during COVID, for example, or for other people, it's more the respiratory stuff, or for other people, it's immune stuff. So agnostic of what your genes are doing, you have to be cautious about what will kill you, which would be clotting problems and breathing problems. Everything else boils down to mitochondrial repair and in replacing antioxidant and good fat combos and stuff.
Okay. That's awesome. And it's like I feel a little bit validated because I've been focusing on doing research and actually looking with treating patients with NAD post-COVID, just looking at the research on it. And then I've been doing a lot more so on the NAD IV side of things. And honestly, that's just like the vitamin C, that's an entirely different, subject for a whole
it's a
different
whole
talk.
other thing. Yeah.
It really is. So that's super important with that. So I really appreciate that as well. And I guess the big thing is, is working with your physician and saying, hey, I'm in recovery and these are, because everyone seems to be recovering so differently. I've got, I've had severe GI issues and respiratory. And I do want to ask you on the respiratory recovery side, your thoughts on nebulized glutathione or acetylcysteine or any other good things for that.
Yeah, so that's a good one to bring up. So nebulizers, asthmatics generally have had nebulizers and use them. Other people don't normally think about it, but it's basically a way to aerosolize something, usually a medicine or cysteine or glutathione or something, and so that you can breathe it in. It actually gets into your lungs and into your respiratory passages. N-acetylcysteine and glutathione can both be nebulized, and they're actually quite helpful at that stage, especially if you have lingering lung problems that you're, for instance, a friend of mine who's, a month and a half past the end of technical COVID, and so they're in post-COVID, they still have days where they have to use some oxygen, so that like their lungs were the weak link. And nebulized either N-acetylcysteine or glutathione can be very, very useful in getting you past that particular hump. Partly what they do is help make sure that the mucus doesn't plug up the little alveoli that transfer our oxygen. Part of what they do is help with actual local immunity. And then the big thing is that they replace the local antioxidant, mix that's in there. If you've never used N-acetylcysteine or glutathione and you get a nebulizer, they smell real sulfury. They're sort of a rotten egg kind of smell. So it's like you're breathing in something you don't want to breathe in, but it's that good. So you really should. And there's no way really around that.
Oh, yeah.
The nice thing now is they have nebulizers that are very compact and they're not like a big giant thing like we used to have to use. And you can get depending on how long you're going to need it, you can either buy a small unit or you can rent one for time when they prescribe it. Your doctor needs to prescribe these things because they're a drug, even if they're NAC. But nebulized treatments are super important. There's also, this sort of bridges where we're at now in the active stage. So in certain cases, during a short period of time, The inhaled steroid budesonide is very useful. And what I've seen, which seems totally logical to me with the patients that I'm working with, the direction from the hospital and primary care is usually if they have the flu-like illness with no respiratory, they don't give them that. If they have flu symptoms with respiratory symptoms on top of it, they'll give them a short course of inhaled budesonide, and that does seem to be helpful. Obviously, that's, you know, your doctor's going to be working with you on that because that's a drug, and you don't want to misuse that. But that can be very useful and important as well for the respiratory symptoms.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that because that took us through the whole gamut from before, in the
Yeah.
midst of it and afterwards, right? So the last thing I want to touch on, this is kind of and I kind of warned you, this is the minefield of this conversation was testing, right? So
Yeah.
because again, not getting into what test is the best, which one we should avoid and all that, it's just more the interpretation, right? So
Yeah.
because again, and it's like I've had patients and, hey, I've got a positive antibody test. And it's like, does this mean I had coronavirus? I'm like, yeah, it depends on which coronavirus you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And what that means. And then knowing about T cell immunity. And then, like, even though, because the other conundrum is that you get people who were positive, had symptoms, they wait about a month, they do the antibody test and it's negative, and they're giving me the WTF look, and I'm also giving them the WTF look, and we're just looking at each other, staring uncomfortably for 5 seconds before well, this doesn't mean you don't have immunity to it, because we're still learning about how T cell immunity, interacts with this condition and how it affects the antibodies with this condition. And we're all researching, and I am too. And then I try to exit stage left as fast as possible. So that being said,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
yeah.
testing is a real minefield. And here's the bottom line with testing. And this is not like there's no grand negative scheme or anything around this. It's just you get hit with a brand new mutation of a virus. You've never had to test anyone for that before. And
Right.
so,
Mhm.
testing doesn't just come out of the air. It's like, so what you mentioned earlier is a big picture thing to keep in mind. Coronavirus as a family is a lot of viruses, and they usually cause from the neck up colds, right? So if you have a test that is not sensitive to which coronavirus, and it's looking for an antibody or even a PCR, the nose swab, if it's not sensitive, then if you had a cold with another coronavirus, it'll be positive, right? So one of the things you have to be cautious with is the test is only as good as the way it's made and set up. And so what I'll usually tell people is with the nose swab, which is the DNA to the PCR test, looking for nuclear material, and everyone knows if they've had something stuffed up their nose, so they know that one. If you have symptoms and the test is positive, that's pretty cause and effect. You can go with that. If you're asymptomatic but you've been exposed to people and the test is positive, you should probably start planning to become symptomatic or you're doing preventive things. If the test is negative, it might not mean that you aren't going to be positive next week, right? It's like that's not a one and done kind of test. So the nose swab one, the only time you can really feel secure, unfortunately, is if you have a positive test and you have symptoms, and then it's like that's probably true. The nose swab one where it's looking for nuclear remnants, again, it can pick up other coronaviruses and maybe be positive. And these might be the people that are positive but never develop symptoms. It's because they're
Right.
positive for a cousin coronavirus.
Right.
Um, on the antibodies, whether it's like the finger prick one or you get your blood drawn, that's B cell immunity. So there's T and B cell immunity, and then some other ancillary stuff. B cell immunity makes antibodies. So they're easy to find on tests. But again, if the test primers are looking for not SARS-CoV-2, but anything in the neighborhood, you could be positive because you had a coronavirus cold that wasn't COVID-19.
Right.
Also, this whole conundrum, which it's like IV vitamin C, it's a whole other show, but the conundrum around I know I had corona, it's 6 weeks later, I got no antibodies, what's going on? This is what's on the news a lot, like, oh, we're not keeping our immune memory. And I did a whole podcast about it a few weeks ago, but the bottom line is, because there's the B and the T cell side, you can have memory on either or both sides. What we appear to be seeing, which is not easy to test, so no one's going to have mass market tests for this, is that the T cell side might keep immunity to SARS-CoV-2. B cell might lose it. The cool thing is that the T cell side actually can turn the B cells back on. So if you get re-exposed, either memory side will kick on and tell the other side to do its thing. So and there's a lot of really like overblown news stories about, oh no, we're losing our immunity. And well, yes, if you're just looking at B cell immunity, but that's not all of your immune system. So if we do retain T cell, which can't be tested in mass, like you can't go to your regular lab and get it done, but in the research labs where they can test this sort of stuff, it appears we keep that. So we will have immunity. We'll just have a different type of immunity than having, antibodies. And that's okay, because you can make those rather quickly.
Right. And
Yeah, but testing is tough, because I mean, if I'm infected with something, or I want to know, I'd like the test to tell me that.
right.
What we see here is, what people like you and I who've dealt with tests for infectious diseases in other settings, COVID-19 is just showing the vagaries of infectious disease testing. And it's not that we don't know what we're doing, it's that we have, this moving target, and the tests are only as good as how we, laser them in on the target. And there's a lot of the mass-produced tests that aren't very, they're not very focused.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as more time goes on, we're going to learn more, because it's and that doesn't even go down the pathway of potential mutations, right? And how do we
Yeah,
go from there? And so, and you're starting to see stories and papers on the reinfected, and then there's the thought process of, okay, you were positive what your viral load actually was. Was it enough of a viral load for you to get to that
yeah,
T cell immunity? So there's a
yeah,
lot to be discussed there and a lot to learn as we go forward. So
yeah.
and it really does make it difficult for the patient and the practitioner, because it's like, we need to know these things to know how to move forward,
Yeah.
clinically and as a society. So we're just in a rough place. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I really thought that was the big point of this talk with you today, is like, okay, the way I talk to my patients, and even for myself, is that I don't want to be passive about this and wait for things to happen. So what can I
Right,
do to,
right.
to be informed, to be educated, and put myself in the best position, and our patients in the best position to
Mm-hmm.
survive this thing, and that's really, in many ways, not to be blunt, that's the best we can do in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways,
Yeah,
and that's what we're
yeah,
trying to do. So,
yeah.
man, it's just, and again, Dr. A, can I call you Paul now? Because I'm a doctor now. It's Paul. Can I do
That's
that
right.
now? Oh man, it's so
Whatever you
cool.
want.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so cool. It's like, it's like, I've made it. I made it, So it makes me happy to do that. And I was very happy to have you on the show. So before we kind of wrap this up, where can people find you?
The easiest is social media. Either both are just DRA online, Dr. A online, Instagram, DRA online,
Mhm.
Facebook, DR period A online, and they both have links to whatever I'm doing, and uh, podcasts and the books and all that stuff. But that's really the best way. Yeah.
Okay. I want to tell you this. You've gotten a lot better on social media. I remember like when I first started following you on Instagram, I was like, what is this? It was like, it was like the old man Instagram. It was like the close-up photos. They were just very random. And
Oh yeah, yeah,
oh man,
yeah,
it was
yeah,
so random. I was like, I don't
yeah.
know what Dr. A is doing right now, man, but he's my guy. So I'm
Yeah, my early social media use, I never thought that social media would be a thing. So I just was
yeah,
playing with it and doing whatever. And
right.
no, I have 5 adult children, and
Mhm.
they dog me about anything I do wrong, and so I learn from them really.
That's how
So
you learn,
I've
I'm
enlisted
glad.
them to help me. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, it makes me happy, because for a while there, I was like, "Oh man, this is not it. This isn't." I was like, man, we need some help. We got to get a rescue squad
Yeah,
in
no,
here, man. So I'm
no, they ganged up on me, so
okay.
it's them that helps me.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. So I knew, I was like, okay, there's some help here. It's
Yeah,
gonna be
see.
transition. So I was like, he's got a link tree now. He's got this figured
Oh
out. He's got
yeah,
stories.
I learn one, eventually I learn, right?
Oh man, it's awesome to see that. So hey, Dr. A, great to have you on today. This has been a pleasure. This has been an honor. Looking forward to doing one of these again in the future, because I think we can kind of get into the vitamin C part. And
Yeah.
there's, oh man, there's like the math protocol. There's so much more to kind of to go through with this, to figure out what's the best way to get people moving forward. Again, it's been an honor. Hope everyone's been educated today, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
All right.